Welcome, everybody, to the Week 13 playoff edition of the CFF List Waiver Watch Draft. We'll also be providing a recap of the Week 12 guest finals. I'm J-Mill. As usual, I've got my partner, WilleB, and we do not have any guests this week. But how you doing, Willie?
I'm doing all right. Ready to start some playoff and hopefully championship runs here in the next 2 weeks. So
Right,
let's
yeah.
get to
No,
it.
it's in our home league, which we won't bore people with all the details, but I believe when looking at the history last week, this might be the first time in our history where we've been in the playoffs together. We have a league of 24 for anybody that cares, and we take 4 teams to the playoffs is all. The other teams get to fill out different bowl games that pay out different amounts, but from what I could see, you were in a couple championships early on. It's been a minute. I've been having a good run here, maybe the last 10 years. But first time I think we've both been in this 4-team system that we've got out of the 24. So look forward to seeing you in the finals, hopefully.
No, absolutely. Because you got a tough matchup coming up, but
Yeah. I'm
any
playing the
given
number one
Saturday.
seed. I squeaked in as the number 4 after a really solid run. My number one guy, I hope a lot of other people are benefiting from him, is Mateer from Washington State. I do have Dylan Gabriel off this week, but luckily I've got a team that I think had a lot of quarterbacks on the bench, so I think I'll be going with old Sawyer Robinson, but might have to send some questions in to Jared on who to put in there. I've got Sawyer Robinson and Hoover to choose from. But who's just, since we've got a little more time to discuss some of this stuff, who's been leading your team this year in the big 24-team league that we have?
Oh man, golly, the running backs that we've assembled have
Mm-hmm.
basically been leading the way, and then we're talking about LaQuint Allen. I got Caleb Johnson, I believe, week
Right.
2. He's been, doing the bulk of the work. I mean, Ollie Gordon, I don't even think I've started him once this year just because it's too inconsistent. I just couldn't count on
Yeah.
it. But after Royals, decided to call it quits. Luckily, Jalen Noel, Zachary Franklin, Jamal Pritchett, and then Justin Lockhart. Been telling people Justin Lockhart.
Right.
He's been a steady starter. So,
Yeah. It's
and
been
then
pretty
and
good.
then
Funny.
you're at the for the quarterback, you're up and down guy, which he's actually been more consistent this year, thankfully, and that's Jackson Dart. So
Yeah.
lucky to have
He
him.
came through for you this year. I
Yeah.
thought it was funny now that you've mentioned Ollie Gordon being so inconsistent. I know when we were talking this weekend, you mentioned how inconsistent even LaQuint Allen had been, but he did,
Hmm.
he'd have some huge games and then let you down a little bit. But that's saying something when we talked about how inconsistent LaQuint Allen has been, and then you haven't started Ollie Gordon because he's been the most inconsistent for you.
Right.
Um, so that's a shame. Then I know Dorian, for those that don't know, my son is super frustrated because he held on to Caleb Johnson for 2 years, hoping that he would turn into what everybody thought he might be, and then finally gave up on him in the preseason of this year. And then it looks like you're the one that stumbled on him to pick up in week 2. So,
Yeah.
that could have been the difference. Dorian barely missed the playoffs, and that actually could have been a big difference in him getting in the playoffs or not making it. He's our number 5 team out of the 24 this year. And him losing this
Yeah.
week and
Because
me winning is what got me in.
yeah, Johnson. I mean, he's our second leading scorer, behind Dart.
Yep.
So
Yeah.
I guarantee you, it definitely could have helped him. And plus, I mean, didn't Dorian, top 3 or 4 as far as points, and then not the playoff. I
Yeah.
think is that
Right.
still a thing?
He's I think he's in the top 4, but he's again, it came down to win-loss record. Nobody
Hmm.
was in a position to steal that 4 spot this year because all 4 of us in the uh, the three out of the 4 of us had pretty good points. Far Rockaway is not nearly as good in the points column, but because they're not the number 4 seed, they can't have the spot stolen from them anyways. I'm the only one that could have had my
Yeah.
spot stolen if somebody had more points. So luckily, the team that could have done it didn't have enough points to steal it from me. But anyways, just a little look inside the home league for us. We'll move it on here, but again, we have a little more time because there's just 2 of us. But before we move on to our draft to get you the players that we think might pull you through the semis into your championship, let's take time to give Jared that pat on the back for pulling off as solid of a performance as you can get. He had 130.7 points. His team is up here on the screen. Owen McCowan wasn't the best quarterback out of the 4 chosen. Dwight had the best quarterback this week with Parker Navarro, but he still got 32, which is tremendous from Owen McCown. UTSA has really been turning it on the offensive side. But the big one for him was Justin Lockhart, who Willie had mentioned earlier. He's been telling people and pushing people that, hey, Nash isn't the only guy on that team catching passes. Lockhart looked like he didn't quite have that, high ceiling like Nash has had. But we did promise you that he would get you at least a consistent 15 to 18 points nearly every week when Jared took him last week. But he broke through that ceiling that he had and had his season high this week with 33. And then that combined with Al-Jay Henderson's 28.5, just those 3 alone almost got Jared to 100. But he talked about Dylan Carson being a little bit of a dice roll. He had 28 carries the week before out of the blue. It looks like what he mentioned could be coming true, as Carson had another game with, I think, 26 carries this week to pull in 15.7 points for Jared. And I'm going to see what happens. That's a guy that I have in the home league in the semifinals. I'm throwing him in that lineup this week, Willie. Any thoughts? Is it too much of a gamble if people have Carson? He's had back-to-back games with over 25 carries. You think he's somebody, a guy like me can rely on when you need him to come through in the semifinals now?
No, I mean, I absolutely think so. I mean, hell, they played Nevada
Right.
this week, and then you get San Diego State. So,
Right.
Why not?
Yeah. If he hadn't got the 25 plus this week, even if he had like 14 or 15, I'd be a little worried. But the fact that he's had back-to-back games with 25, I think Jared's prophecy there of Carson being the guy to gamble on could come true, or at least I'm hoping it does. We're going to ignore the left side of the screen, which are my picks. I mentioned when we tweeted out the results this morning, I was just happy that Eli Sanders came through and got 16.8 points in the late game against Washington State, because I was looking very trashy. Prior to that, it looked like I might join the top 10 worst scorers of all time in our 3-year history of keeping scores here. But luckily, he got me up to 58.5. I had a good outing by my quarterback and Eli Sanders. KJ Duff at tight end got me 6.5, which is, adequate. We won't even really say good. You see, he's not in a very bright green. He's more in a neutral color there at 6.5. But half my team just crapped the bed outside of that. So, Gerald Green ended up being the wrong end of the Troy backfield. Took slide on over to your team there, Willie. And as you'll see, we debated if Gerald Green would kind of take over the backfield these last couple of weeks. Well, that is not the case. Damian Taylor ended up with the bulk of the carries. Didn't get in the end zone, so unfortunately for Willie, he only had 9.2. But otherwise, Willie is still on his hot streak. He had the 96.8. Grounded there with Hauser, who had a low game, but still a decent game. He got that 19.5. We're always looking for minimum league recommendations that'll get you 20 at quarterback. But Keon Mosey, went over the top. He kind of finished it off with a 75-yard touchdown run or something in that range to get an extra 13 points for most people. Got Willie up to 25.7 with him. And then our guy, Demir Miller, Willie said he had seen his targets rising the last couple of weeks. All he needed was him to get in the end zone, and that's exactly what he did. He got another game with, I think, 9 or 10 targets, following even more than that in his last 2. But even with Monangai back, Demir Miller was heavily targeted and got Willie 24.7. Norton was slowed down a little bit. It looks like that NIU defense is pretty stout against the pass, uh, and you might consider the matchups this week when you're playing guys against them. But Norton still pulled off 13.7, which again we're looking for 15 points minimum from these receivers and running backs. So nice job, Willie. It looks like you've beat the season now.
Yeah, I mean, your mic was cutting out last week, and so we kind of had a little bit of discussion while you were trying to get back in. And I was telling
Mm-hmm.
Jared, I said, it's a little bit different when you and I have this separate competition, and I just knew I needed to get this week taken care of, and then we wouldn't have to have that final. So
Right.
because Lockhart was actually my number one wide receiver, but I did not want you grabbing Demir Miller, so I went ahead and took him first.
Gotcha.
So it ended up working out
He was on my
perfectly
list.
as far as
Yeah.
yeah, as far as
Yeah.
yeah, as far as Mike and but it would have been nice to have the Lockhart Miller, but I really did want Miller that way, you couldn't be able to get him, so that worked out.
Yeah, because minimally, if he replaced my worst receiver, I would have netted still 20 points, which would have put me at 78 and a half, and you would have been at 76 and a half, if assuming maybe you got a
Mm-hmm.
receiver that was as bad as one of the ones that I picked up. So, you still
Right. I
probably
mean,
could have beat me. I'm sure you would have had at least a 10-point receiver in there and still beat me, but I would have had at least a fighting chance if I would have been able to get Miller ahead of you.
yeah,
So,
because like I said, I probably would have waited a little bit too long and still not have taken Lockhart or Miller if I hadn't just said, okay, let me just go ahead and focus on our competition and get it taken
right.
care of. But just happy to see that Mosey actually came through. So those who were able to get a little piece of that, hopefully going forward. Um,
Yeah.
I will say, let's temper it, and if you can get to the championship, wait. Like I said, NIUs they're a little different,
Mm-hmm.
so they're kind of sneaky good. So
And
like, I wouldn't
Mosey,
I wouldn't necessarily play him if I had other options this week.
because he's going against NIU.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
And just to wrap up our head-to-head, I mean, we're battling this week to help people. We still like the competition, and really our mission is just to throw out some guys that people might have overlooked that they can still pick up if they're in a situation where guys on a bye. Like if you've got Dylan Gabriel, I've got him in our league also as kind of my super flex second quarterback spot guy. I'm going to have to replace him with somebody this week. Luckily, my roster is pretty deep. But if you don't have the fortune of having a backup you like because you had Gabriel and he's off this week, I think we got plenty of guys for you. Um, but Willie has locked down the. He's beaten me 7-5 week on a weekly basis. He's won 7 out of the 12 weeks. I've won 5. And what I hate worse than him beating me 7-5, that wouldn't be so bad. But he's averaging 89.2 in the season, and my average has dipped to 82.3 at this point. So I still want to redeem myself. I know last year we finished strong. We we both had over 100 last year, so it can be done even down here at the end of the season. I had 135 last year in this week that we're doing, and you had 104. So we're still going to try to get our average up. The guest had a phenomenal average this season of 96.7 to give the overall average of 90 that we're always looking for. So I like how that worked out. But let's also give Dwight some kudos. He had 87.7, which again, when you're picking guys at the end of the season, it's a little bit of slim pickings. Sort of pull some guys out to get up to 87.7. Still deserves some credit. Parker Navarro led him with 45.7. He took a chance on the freshman running back at NIU, but he ended up splitting more time than I think everybody expected with Gavin Williams as they look to replace Antonio Brown or Ontario Brown. So again, maybe cool off for these next 2 weeks on Telly Johnson a little bit, unless you desperately need him in there, because it looks like even if Brown's still out, they're going to lean on a committee there at NIU. And then Isaiah Page, though, from Old Dominion, still showed some promise there with 12 points for Dwight, and his quarterback happens to be eligible still. So I'll be curious to see if Willie takes him. I've got him as a possibility on my list there from Old Dominion, and I'm speaking of Colton Joseph, who is still at 27%. Um, so we'll see. if Willie or myself taking. But Old Dominion's kind of got it rolling there with the passing game. So we'll see what happens. But with that, we really want to thank everybody that joined us. I think we had 12 or 13 different guest appearances. We always love the dialogue that we get and the advice that we get from those guys. So thanks everybody. But from here, Willie, we'll just have to take it ourselves and see what we can do for the people.
All right, sounds good.
All right, and I guess your name's in there first. We didn't use the randomizer, but we're gonna stick with you going first, and then I'll get 2 picks, and then we'll go single picks after that.
Yeah, I mean, if that's what you want to do, I mean, it's just a simple copy and paste. If not, it doesn't matter to me.
All right. Well, we'll let you kick it off then, since so we don't have to do any cutting and pasting. Then I'll take 2, and then we'll fill in all the blanks from there.
Okay, well, we'll do it a little differently as far as what we've been picking lately. So I'm just going to go ahead and start wide receiver first.
Okay.
Let's just do it that way. And this is just the guy that we've just been talking all season long, at least I have, and that's Justin
Mm-hmm.
Lockhart.
Ah.
It's crazy to me that he's still just 19% rostered,
Right.
but it is what it is. Not much I can do about that other than to tell you that you probably should have had him on your team by now.
Yeah, and I really think people were just worried about Nash early on cannibalizing targets. But at the worst, like we said last week, it's worth repeating. At the worst, Lockhart's going to be a 15 to 17 point guy. And he proved last week his ceiling's even higher as teams probably are shifting their game plans to try to make sure they lock down Nash. So I think that's what's opened it up even more for Lockhart to make him more valuable here in these last couple of weeks of the season. So
Yeah,
he was at
and
the top of my list. I like it.
yeah, and I like the fact that I mean, I know they're playing UNLV. UNLV hasn't given up just the a crazy amount of touchdowns, only 16, but they do give up 260 yards against the pass. And then, like I say, he is really the volume guy. And that's where
Right.
he's getting the bulk of his points. Now, if he gets into the end zone, that's just gravy, but Lockhart should be, one of the tops of your list in the next 2 weeks, that's
Yep,
for sure.
exactly. So I like it. I've got a couple others there that I also like, and it's not surprising. You're going to see a few repeat names here. It is surprising that some of them are still under 30 and available for us to make repeat picks, but I'm going to take another repeat pick. I think we're going to just kind of pick apart Jared's team from last week and maybe stick with what he had there. I'm going to take Al.J. Henderson from Buffalo, who is only 8% rostered still. He's averaging 13.4 in the season, but I've mentioned over and over, you really need to look at their last 4 or 5 games. Even in some cases, maybe the last 3 or 4 games, where he's seen 25, 14, 22, and this week he had 28.5 points. So throw the 13.4 out the window. He's averaging, off the top of my head, about 22 points a game, 21 points a game in the last 4. And what I really like is his carries have increased in each of the last 4 games, maxing out here in week 12 with 27. It's full blown action right now. We had all 12 teams on Tuesday and Wednesday, so a lot of people probably got to see some teams play that they hadn't watched all year. Buffalo seems to know what they're doing on offense now. They've got a good quarterback. They've got a solid receiver, and Al.J. Henderson gives them a threat out of the backfield that they are just feeding more and more. So, even though he's playing Eastern Michigan, who's 22nd against points allowed in terms of fantasy points, I think the volume's there for him to still get his points and have his production.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned, you might submit a question to Jared because I was actually thinking about it as well, and as far as Henderson's concerned, because with the backs that I have, he would be a flex guy, and
Right.
do I want to throw in a quarterback who may only play a half, and who that's going to be, but or do we go with the Henderson or someone else? So,
Right in the flex spot.
well,
Yeah. Well, I'm not playing you this week. I'm looking Eastern Michigan again. Regardless of Fantrax calculations showing them 22nd in terms of points given up to fantasy running backs, they're still giving up 158 a game on the ground. They've given up 16 touchdowns. So
Hmm.
again, I'm not letting that Fantrax number scare me this week. I think he's a guy that if he gets his 20 carries, he should get 100 yards to go with that. Can't guarantee he'll get in the end zone, but that's he should have a solid game again.
Yeah, yeah. I know. I'm just more looking at, I'm going to start my studs, and so,
Right,
but looking at that flex spot, I think Henderson would fit in certain situations. So,
right,
who you
right.
got next?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think I might go quarterback. Well, you know what? Maybe yeah, because there's the running backs. I have quite a few. There's one. I have four quarterbacks on the list. I know we only needed two. It's a tough choice in my opinion on kind of out of these four. I mentioned one, Colton Joseph. I'm going to take mine here, so I can say them all. I'm choosing between Joseph, Parker Navarro is still out there going against Toledo. Kevin Jennings, who I had last week and was my best player for SMU, has a good matchup against Virginia. And then there's the old standby from the waiver watch, Hauser from ECU, who's still out there at 26% miraculously, going against North Texas, who's 128th in terms of points allowed to quarterbacks. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so based on that, I'm going to go to the Hauser well. I love the matchup. North Texas being 128th in terms of fantasy points allowed to quarterbacks. We know North Texas gets in those shootouts. They're 115th in passing yards allowed. They've given up 20 touchdowns. So give me Hauser, who had a little bit of a down week, but his down week was still 20 points basically. Uh, but preceding that, he had 31, 31, and 45. So I think against a team like North Texas in a little shootout style game, this should be a game where he at least gets you 25 points if you can still get him. And he's only rostered on 26% of teams. So, a third of the leagues out there, or at least half, 30%, it's still amazing. So hopefully some guys can still get their hands on him.
Yeah. Yeah, he was number one on my list only because, he always should be. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm glad that you did take him. I only had three guys on my list.
Okay.
I know I'm not going to take Colton Joseph,
Okay.
so I'll let that wait a little bit. Uh, but I guess I'll just go ahead and do what I was wanting to do last week, and we'll take Winston Wright Jr. We'll keep that East Carolina thing going.
Yeah, I know we talked last week about kind of not knowing which Eastern Carolina receiver to focus on, but it looks like had you taken him last week, it would have been the correct one to take. I think he had the biggest game out of all the ECU receivers. So again, you got to love the matchup. I just went through all the numbers. They're giving up a couple touchdowns a game, ton of yards. So there's nothing wrong with playing anybody involved in the passing game on ECU's team this week going against North Texas. I like that. I think I'll do something fun here. He's not the guy. Um, no, I think I'll wait on that. I'll see. I'll see which way you go at running back. I think first. Um, I'm going to go ahead and take the guy that you thought I was going to take last week. I'll give me Demir Miller so I can have a D Miller uh, playing here for Rutgers going against Illinois. A little bit tougher matchup, but again, they found the guy that's getting the volume. His targets the last 3 weeks have been 20, 13, and 11, and that's equated to 24, 23, and 25 points. So he's averaging 23 in his last three. The big question was when Monangai comes back, is he going to still be able to be productive? He was. He had 25 points and still had 11 targets. So another player, throw out the 13.8 points a game. Look at the fact that he's averaged 24 in the last three. Rutgers, they're bowl eligible. They're feeling good. I think being 6-5 isn't good enough for them. They're going to play hungry. So hopefully he plays as well for me as he did for you last week, Willie.
Yeah, well, I hope so. For everyone's sake that you're doing this.
Yep.
I really didn't want to go too heavy on a lot of these guys that we're taking here, but
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it is what it is, especially this
Like
late.
repeat guys, you mean?
Yes, right. The repeats.
Yeah.
So, but that's kind of what we have to do. I mean, I didn't want to have, just all ECU. Is kind of what it's,
Mhm.
starting to look like. So I will go a little bit different, and I'm going to stray from my list, to be honest, because there's
Okay.
one guy that I left off that I really kind of like here, and that's we'll say Devon or Davin Booth from
Hmm.
Mississippi State. Whoops,
Okay.
take that out, put that in there. He is, let's see, the last 2 weeks, he had 19.4 against Tennessee. So he had 20 carries for 125 yards and a touch. The week before he had 16 and then 21.7. So he's getting the carries. He obviously needs to get into the end zone. They get Missouri. Missouri, we've shown that they will give up some points. So let's take this chance and we'll go down.
Yeah, I mean, he's proven he can do it against the tough teams. So Tennessee is seventh against the run right now and only giving up 8 touchdowns, and he still got his points against them, you were saying. So,
Right.
um, even though Missouri's a tough D, but not as tough as Tennessee's against the run.
Yeah. I mean,
Uh,
he averaged 6.3 yards a carry against Tennessee. So
right. And there's some guys you don't necessarily worry so much about the matchup. You just count on the player and the volume that player is going to receive. So
hmm
um, that's what Willie's believing in here. So got to give him props for sticking to his guns there, sticking with his guy. I've got a dilemma here at running back. I guess I'll pull the trigger on one of them here for the second one. I really like Delbert Mims from Eastern Michigan. That would give me kind of a running back on each side of that Buffalo Eastern Michigan game. Buffalo's not very good against the run. He's another guy. All these guys kind of on the list now are in that 13 point, 14 points a game range. He's at 13.8, but he's had over 17.7 in 4 of his last 6. So I like Mims. But there's a guy that's really helped me out in the 48 team league, which looks like I'm advancing in this week, making it to the final 4 of the 48. His name is Mike Washington. And you know what? He was playing with Henderson at Buffalo last year. He was a Buffalo transfer. It took me a minute to figure that out, that's where he came from. But he's on New Mexico State. And again, he really started coming along in the middle of the season. Uh, what impressed me the most is going to sound odd, but I didn't play him last week because they were playing Texas A&M. But even playing on New Mexico State against A&M, he still managed 8.1, which to me, for as bad as New Mexico State is, for him to even get 8.1 against Texas A&M was a little bit surprising. But I'm looking back to the 2 weeks prior. He had 27.2 and he had 15.8, and he's just been a guy that was emerging prior to this Texas A&M game in terms of the yards per carry. He's getting, he's not a big volume guy, but he's making the most of his 11, 12, 13 carries a game. He's getting those 100-yard games. He's finding the end zone. So I'm going to go with old Mike Washington to give you guys one of those lower percentage guys that hopefully is still available if you really need somebody in a pinch here at 4% rostered.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, I didn't put him on my list only because we only need to go so far, but
Right.
I do like the deep dive, especially where he came from, and
Mm-hmm.
hell with Jay Henderson, I can see why he probably left, but
Yeah, exactly.
I'm
Right.
glad yeah, glad he's still getting a shot and doing his thing.
Right.
Obviously, I think, well, now I'm going to go tight end here,
Okay.
only because you
Oh,
filled
right. Yeah, you don't
your
have to
other
do the other
spots.
two.
Yep.
Yep. You
And
could go on 3 right now if you wanted to, technically.
well, yeah, I have
You
them
want
ready, so I
All
just
right, well, give
might.
us two. Yeah, let's let you go back to back because we
Okay.
know what I've got to take and we know what you've got to take. So yeah, give us
Yeah.
two.
So
Give us two, Willie.
yes, yes, I'm going to give you a guy here, and we're going back to your boys' alma maters here, and so I'm going to go tight end Toby Payne.
There you
Uh,
go. There you go.
he's had double digits the last 4 of the last 5 weeks. Hopefully that Louisiana Monroe game was an anomaly where only
Right.
had one target. Outside of that, he's had 15.4, 11.3, 11.4, and then he had 10 against Coastal Carolina. So he is 0% rostered. If so,
And while you're looking, while you've got a screen up, when he scored yesterday, I remember saying that I think he had scored touchdowns in the last 4 out of 5 games. Is that what you're seeing there? Does he have a touchdown in 4 of the
it
last
was out
five?
of 3 out of 5. So the Georgia
Okay.
State game, he did not score, even though he still had
Okay.
his 11.3.
Yeah, yeah. So he's not getting a tremendous amount of targets, but he's making the most of the 3 or 4 or 5 that he gets every game, and he is finding the end zone, at a pretty decent rate still based on the targets he's getting. So I like it. They
Right.
look for him. They look for him at the goal line. He's part of that package, that's for sure.
Yep. And that's
Yeah,
what you
that's
want.
that's a good one. I like it. Yep.
And then
Okay.
so with that, since you, I mean, if you want me to take two, I will.
Yeah, go ahead. Let's get another one.
Yeah. So I'm going to go a guy who he had a sneaky comeback game. You kind of just forget about him. But they have a
Mhm.
great matchup against Temple, and we're talking about Robert Henry from out of UTSA.
Okay.
He
Yeah.
had 20 carries for 168 yards, 2 touchdowns. The week before against Memphis is when this only time he had under double digit carries. So throwing out that game, you go back before his 37.5, he had 18.9 against Tulsa. We know you start everybody against Tulsa. He had
Mhm.
17.9 against Florida International, and then he 8.7 against Rice, another loss. Got to give the guy the carries. Once they do that, they start winning.
Yeah, and he's a guy that transfers. They were a little crowded in the backfield. But after last season, he had 588 yards last year. Still part of a committee, and I think people thought he might get a little bit more production this year. But he again got caught up in the committee early in the season. But as UTSA has started to figure out what they're doing on offense, he's become the big dog in the backfield. So got a lot of weapons on UTSA. It's pretty interesting how they've emerged at the end of the season with the quarterback, the tight ends, who I may or may not be taking here in just a second, and then Henry now, in the backfield. So yeah, UTSA
Yeah,
is
and then
looking pretty
so
strong on offense.
yeah, and to wrap that up, I mean, they play Temple, who gives up 214 yards on the ground. They've given up 24 rushing touchdowns. So
Right.
he could
Yeah.
have a nice day.
Temple, Temple and Tulsa always play guys against Temple and Tulsa. I'd have to look up Toledo, but I feel like maybe Toledo falls into that too. We go the 3 T's: Temple, Tulsa, and Toledo.
Yeah, Temple's fallen off. I mean, I remember we were talking. It used to be Temple, and then I moved to Tulane, but yeah, Temple's kind of fallen
Oh
off
yeah,
on defense. That's for sure.
right, right, yeah, yeah, yeah. Temple and Tulane used to be some of the defenses you didn't want to play against.
Right.
All right, good. I like the logic. He was on my list. He's sitting there also. Um, I got to move on and take my wide receiver here. I'll save tight end for last. I'm going to go with a guy that people got to see really emerge, this week, and that's Joseph Williams for Tulsa. He's only rostered on 2% of teams. Uh, Shout out to Felix Sharp over at Campus to Canton. As he was doing his thing, he had a tweet that really mirrored exactly what I was thinking, which is, this is the time of the season where, instead of giving up and you stop picking up players, you really start doing your scouting for next year. And this is a guy that he and I both, again, we're on the same page and thinking the exact same thing at the same time, which is, who the hell is Joseph Williams and where did he come from? I don't know, but he's on my radar now because of the week he had this week, which was 5 catches for 158 yards and 3 touchdowns. So that's a guy who immediately goes to the group of guys we're putting in that top 70 or 80 guys next year, probably to start looking at for the 2025 rankings, just because of, you don't do that if you don't have skills. And he's got 2 weeks prior, 10 points, 24 points, and then this week was the 39 points. So you're seeing some nice progression. And they're playing USF, which is a pretty bad defense there. Another one, 101st, against receivers. So give me Joseph Williams from Tulsa. Might be the one shining thing over at the Golden Hurricane over there.
Yeah, I like it. I like it a lot. I'll let you go ahead and take your tight end too.
All right.
Yes.
Uh, yeah, I kind of picked this, remembered this guy at the end. It is the guy I mentioned earlier, or one of the guys from UTSA that I was referring to earlier, which is Patrick Overmeyer. If you caught any of that UTSA game, uh, what you might have noticed is the announcers referring over and over to the fact that UTSA just kept targeting their big tight ends. And this was the one out of the two that's kind of the most consistent in getting the most targets. Patrick Overmeyer, uh, he's had double digits in the last 4 weeks, which for a tight end at the end of the season, that's gold right there. 14 points, 10 points, 10 points, and 14 points was his production. So he's averaging 12 over the last four, even though his season average is six. Throw that out the window. Like I've said about a lot of these
Hmm.
guys, look at his
Right.
last four games where he's averaging 12. He's getting the targets. He's a focal point. It's the guy McCown is looking for when he's throwing the ball and needs to pick up a first down. So I feel very strongly about this Overmeyer pick being a good one. Didn't even realize it till Willie plugged it in right there. He's a 0% owned guy. So I've now given five guys that are in single digits to go along with Willie's two. That's seven guys, here out of the 14, half of the squad that's rostered on, 8% of less of teams. So there's a good chance you're going to get some of these guys if you really need some. Forget the guys
Yeah.
maybe in the high 20s. Seems like a lot of those leagues, they're tricky, as far as how this percentage is calculated and if you can really find them. But I feel really good about people being able to find a lot of guys on this list today.
Yeah, and I'll keep that train running as far as like the single digit
Okay.
roster. And this is a guy that I've just been talking him up at the end of our shows, at
Mm-hmm.
least for the last month and a half. And so I'm going to finally take him now, and that's going to be CJ Ogbonna
There
out of
you go.
Buffalo,
Yep.
and he 3% rostered. He just he's just consistent, and he can light up the scoreboard. He had 40.1 against Ball State, 28.7 against Akron, 13.1 at Ohio. I'm not sure what happened in that game when they got blown out, and then 22.1 against Western Michigan. But these next two matchups, Eastern Michigan, and then he has Kent State. So if you have him and you're able to plug him in, you just might be sneaky enough to win yourself um, championships and a little bit of money.
Yeah, maybe next year that's what we do. We say we got to go under 15% for the final week to make sure it's players that can really be found for the semifinal round or most of these leagues. But the fact that one, two, three, four, five, six, seven, eight are under 8%, and there's only one on the list here over 20%, which is Hauser. Everybody else is 19% or less. So good job, Willie, on finding some hidden gems here. Uh, is there anybody else from your notes that I didn't take that you wanted to shout out or recommend to the folks out there?
I thought about taking a wide receiver. So I thought about Matt Sykes out of Rice.
Okay.
And I kind of liked what he had been putting out on film the last few weeks.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. Maybe you can pull it up a little faster than I can. I'm not sure why my screen's kind of freezing up on me.
Not screen right
I got you. Okay. So yeah, so Matt Sykes, that's why it wouldn't pull up correctly. You got to put the name in,
Maybe I
right?
didn't put it much.
Yeah, so 2 weeks ago against Navy at 23 and a half, he had 19.7 against Memphis. So he's getting the targets, double digit targets the last couple of weeks, averaging 7 receptions for about 82 yards and a score the last 2 weeks. So kind of a sneaky matchup against UAB.
In an
He would have been,
NCAA.
yeah, he would have been one to look at. Dean Patterson from FIU, really thought about him. I
Yeah.
kind of given up on him in a couple of spots early in the season, but he looks like they're back on track. They get Kennesaw State, so that's another one. And I think, yeah, you already talked about Colton Joseph. I was a little down on Telly Johnson after what I saw last week, so
Yeah,
didn't want to mention
we
him.
cool off on that, I think. Unless you've got a
Yeah, and
dynasty
then
league. Sorry for
yeah,
talking dynasty. Go grab him if you can, if you've got a
yeah, and in the same game that we talked about, Matt Sykes. Let's not forget about Cameron Shanks.
dynasty familiar.
From UAB. I mean, the kid is just he's shifty. He's just quick. I mean, you really can't catch him on the phone booth. I mean, so he had 5 for 45 and another score. I know they lost against Memphis, but if you're in a pinch, can't get anyone else, that's another name to think about.
All right, and then I didn't take him because I didn't want to double up with a running back and receiver from the same team. Might have made sense if Willie had grabbed him
Hmm.
to go with his quarterback, but we talked about Buffalo kind of improving here with the quarterback and the running back, but they've also got a receiver that's benefiting, and that's Victor Snow, 7% rostered, going against a Eastern Michigan pass defense. It's even worse than the run defense. And Victor's had 30 points, 19 points. Then he dipped down. He had 8, but he bounced back last week and had 21. So again, another guy that's averaging about 19 or 20 points in his last 4. And the only reason I didn't take him is because I took Al J. Henderson first, and I really didn't want to double up on Buffalo that in that manner this week. I wanted to spread it out a
Right.
little bit. That's one there. The guy that I would bet that I took him in this exact same week last year is Cole Taylor at tight end for West Virginia. He's averaging 9.6 on the season. He's hit the double digit mark in 5 of his 10 games, so there's a little bit of inconsistency there. He's playing against UCF, which is kind of middle of the pack defense. But he's still averaging 9.6, which gets you close to 10. So there's a tight end that I liked. We mentioned Colton Joseph is a quarterback we didn't take. They're playing Marshall, who doesn't have the best defense, but they've got some momentum going. They seem to be getting better. But he's had 25 points in 5 of his last 6, so you can't really look past that. That's the one of the quarterbacks. Lastly, the top scoring waiver quarterback last week, Parker Navarro. Willie and I didn't take him. He's playing against Toledo. He's averaging 20.9 on the season, and he's had 25 points in 4 of his last 6. So very similar to Colton Joseph. The last 6. He's getting over 25 quite a bit. Uh, those would be probably the last players that I mentioned. So I think we've done our job here, Willie.
Yeah, no, and there's always going to be a couple of ones that still land under the radar, because a couple names that you mentioned, they weren't on my list, but
Mm-hmm.
I will be looking at them closely while we do the last waiver wire pickups where they are allowed,
Right.
and might end up having a couple of these guys on the squad.
Well, a little bit shorter than usual, but we filled some time with some other discussions, which was hopefully entertaining to some. Uh, that's it for me. Good luck, everybody. Again, for just about every league format I know that's out there, this is the Final Four because most leagues have their championships next week. There's not any way around it. Some teams are starting the playoff this week with 4. Some are down to 4 from the 6 or 8 that they had last week. So if you're in your semifinals, hopefully we can help you, plug an unexpected hole that might have come up. Good luck, everybody. Willie B, final words are on you.
All right. Thank you guys for watching and listening, and good luck this week.